Yoga is just enormously popular in the postmodern West. I think a Google search a few weeks ago showed over 86 million entries. Yoga and health had about 36 million or 37 million entries. So just a little sampling of how popular yoga is. They say that in America, last year, something like 43 million people practiced yoga. Obviously, I have no way of verifying those figures, but those are possible estimates. Here in Hollywood, of course, we have our Madonna, Hollywood's own lady of postmodernity. Postmodernism is eating pizza with chicken curry. You know, you like pizza, you like chicken curry with nice spicy gravy, why not eat them together? It is borrowing from any tradition, whatever you want, however you want, with no necessary concern for respect for that culture, its roots, its traditions, its associations. So, Madonna is Our Lady of Postmodernity, that on the one hand she can be a material girl, as though the spiritual realm doesn't exist, and the next breath she could be a spiritual girl leading the movement for Kabbalah, revival of Kabbalah here in Hollywood. So, is matter alone real, body alone real, physical fitness alone that really matters, or is spiritual realm also real, and both have to be cared for? That's sort of the subject or an important facet of what we're going to be talking about today. Much of the postmodern yoga, we will talk about classical yoga in a few minutes, but postmodern yoga, which is taking things from different disciplines without regard to the discipline itself, the framework itself, it is, for me, for many of us in India, I must confess that we are proud that India has something to contribute to the celebrities in Hollywood. You know, a lot of Indians are quite pleased with it, though the fact is that many Indians, particularly those who really do care for yoga and do care for culture and do care for tradition, they get upset because you are turning it into something the very opposite of what it was intended to be. So as I'll show in a few minutes, yoga began as part of the practical aspect of Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy was a dualistic system, that there is two ultimate realities, body and soul, Prakriti, which is matter or nature, and Purusha, the self, the soul. Human problem is the two have become entangled. Salvation consists in isolating soul, self from body, soul from matter. That's salvation. It's the very opposite of integrating body, soul, and spirit. But the postmodern yoga is integrating body, soul, and spirit. So now it upsets some Hindus, those who know yoga, who understand yoga, what the West does, because what you're doing with yoga is what we do with some of your things. The films, as soon as a James Bond film opens up in Hollywood, we would have a camera, film it, and next day it will be in the plane off to India, where it will be copied and distributed. So pirated copies of the film will be there. But imagine that you are in Bombay, visiting Bombay from Hollywood to Bollywood, and you are passing in front of a railway station and you meet an Indian family, well-dressed Indian gentleman with a woman and a child, and he comes to you and he says that, sir or madam, can I give this Rolex watch to you? I have just come from another town to Bombay for a job, but as soon as I landed here, my wife and child with me, someone ran off with my briefcase, which had all my documentations that I needed for this job. So now I don't have any money, and I don't have any documentations. I can't get this job. I'm stranded here. I want to go back. The only thing I have of value is this Rolex watch. And he pulls out his wallet and takes out a receipt, and he says that, look, I just bought it 3 days ago for 50,000 rupees. But I will give it to you for $50. Now, you are obviously a compassionate American, and you say that here is a family that is stranded. This man is trying to go back home to put his documentation together, and you want to help him and his wife and child not to be sleeping on the streets at night, otherwise they might be looted again. So, besides that, you really like the idea of a Rolex watch which would cost $5,000. You're getting it for $50. And you live in Hollywood. This is a town about image. Substance doesn't matter. Image matters. So this is very good for your image that you're wearing a $5,000 Rolex, right? And it's a great cosmetics, aesthetics, and for your self-esteem, this is good. So you buy it, and as soon as you've given your $50, taken the watch, and moved few yards, his wife pulls out a second Rolex watch, which he starts looking for the next person, because he'd bought all of them for $5 each. Now, what we are doing with Rolex is exactly what you do with yoga, and you might say, what is wrong with it? The man obviously was poor. Now, his story may not be true, but he's doing this because he's poor. I did help a poor family. And besides, it may not be an authentic watch, but it does. Nobody in Hollywood would know where I got it from, how much I got it for. So it's good for me. It's good for my self-esteem. It's good for my image. It's good for the cosmetic purposes of wearing a Rolex. So why not? Well, let's talk about it during question-answer time. But what is important is that Madonna, as the material girl, is the opposite of Shirley Maclaine, who wrote Going Within and Dancing in the Light and Out on a Limb, which was her first book, turned into a 2-part documentary series, Out on a Limb. Now, Shirley Maclaine was, in fact, while Madonna's personal trainer, Roy, has this book, Fitness as Religion, in which he says that for Madonna and him, fitness is religion. Because if you're a material girl, matter alone is real, body alone is real. Religion then means taking care of your body. Has nothing to do with spirit, nothing to do with soul, taking care of your body. So he says that diet and exercises are the rituals of our religion, which we do seriously, and we take care of our body. So while the material girl is taking care of her body, Shirley Maclaine for her, spirituality was getting out of her body. And in Out on a Limb, she has long descriptions of how different people helped her get out of her body, and her body is lying there by the river in South America somewhere, and her spirit is hovering over her body and looking at her body and people who are talking about her, etc., etc. Now, that experience of Shirley Maclaine, out-of-body experience, is in fact what yoga really was seeking originally, and many yogis continue to seek. I'll discuss that when I come to a discussion of Surat Shabda Yoga. So, In some ways, a lot of yoga in California is counterfeit of the original yoga. While the original yoga was isolation of self from body, isolation of soul from body, postmodern yoga is integration of soul and body, at least in words, as we will see a little later, that it is in fact not integration of body, soul, and spirit. It is fit bodies and fat minds and dead souls. Very often are fit bodies, are flexible bodies, and inflexible souls. And that is a serious consideration that we will return to at the end. So, how do you know whether a watch or a note is authentic or counterfeit? One way to know the counterfeit is to really be well familiar with the original. If you know the original, then you can determine whether something is counterfeit. And that's what we're going to do in a brief survey in 1 hour, go through the whole spectrum of what exactly is yoga, so that once you become familiar with the authentic, you can look at whether a particular brand of yoga is authentic or counterfeit. Now, yoga is in fact a generic term for salvation in Hinduism, or a means of salvation. Moksha or samadhi is salvation, and yoga is the path of salvation. Why is yoga the path of salvation? If you were here last Wednesday, we spent quite a bit of time in trying to understand the heart of Hindu metaphysics, which is that all reality is one, especially man is God. God is within you. Your soul, yourself, is the divine self. So salvation is self-realization. Your problem is that you don't know that everything is one. You think that everything is diverse, that you are different from your friend sitting next to you, or different from the chair on which you are sitting, different from the speaker. You might actually hate the speaker because you don't like him. You're completely different, opposite from him, whatever. But we took time to see that how new physics, new science has been showing, beginning with Einstein, that matter and energy is one. In fact, all matter is one energy. And not only matter and energy is one, time and space is one, according to his theory of relativity. Three-dimensional space change into four-dimensional space-time continuum. And not only time and space are one, in fact, the observer and the observed are one when you get into subatomic physics. So, is there a difference between mind and matter? We spent quite a bit of time looking at Teilhard and Chardin and his thesis that, in fact, it is not matter which produces mind or soul, but consciousness which creates this whole universe. And we looked briefly at the implications of the new physics and philosophy coming together, that in reality, the universe doesn't exist. The idea of the universe exists in our minds. When we say we see the universe, or we hear the universe, we touch the universe, we smell the universe, or taste something, all of these sensations are in fact impressions in our brain, which the brain translates to be caused by an external universe. But we have no way of really knowing external universe. Just like the solidity of matter is an illusion. You know, once X-ray began to pass through an atom, we knew that atom was not solid. Atom could be split. But we experience the world as solid. That's an illusion. That's Maya. That's unreality. The reality is that the solid material universe doesn't exist. And everything is one consciousness, Brahma, God, you are God, God is within you, realizing that self. How do you do that? That's where yoga comes in. So we are really building upon last week's lecture. Yoga comes in. The yoga is the means or the technology of actually experiencing oneness of everything. Now, when you talk about self-realization, what this means is that salvation in Hinduism is a matter of perception, of seeing, of realizing, of experiencing. That's what salvation is. To help us understand, because this is such an alien concept, to help us understand, it would be helpful to contrast it with alternative worldviews. What is the crux of human problem? What is human problem? Obviously, there's something wrong with each one of us. If not with us, at least with our spouses. Something is wrong with human beings. What exactly is the problem? Now, if you are a materialist, a true materialist who believes that matter alone exists, nature alone exists, there is no supernatural, there is no God, there is no spirit, then our problem is evolution, our problem is biology. Evolution has made us bad, or at least made our spouses very bad. So, evolution is responsible, genes are responsible. So what's the solution? How do we solve this problem of human bad behavior or badness? Well, then genetic engineering or chemical engineering, which will alter our genes and make us nice and loving and compassionate and tender and kind and forgiving, etc., that would become the means of salvation, chemically altering ourselves, or psychologically altering, reconditioning, re-educating ourselves would be the solution. So that would be a materialistic worldview, that the problem is biological, genetic, answer is genetic engineering. If the Jews had an alternative or a different view, the Jews said that the heart of human problem is rebellion against God, sin. We are rebels, we have rebelled against God, we have alienated from God. As a consequence, God's image in us is marred. We were beautiful, perfect creatures for whom God could look upon us and say that He has made something really, really good, very good. Man was very good, woman was very good. But we fell, and we, as a part of that moral rebellion, our minds and our hearts have become corrupted, and part of that corruption is genetic, but the root of it is a rebellion against God. Therefore, salvation is being forgiven, being reconciled to God, as a prodigal son returning to his father. That's salvation. And then, as once we return to God, His image begins to be reformed in us. We begin to relate to one another as He wanted us to relate to one another, and we begin to relate to nature as He would like us to relate to nature. And that is then salvation, which begins to transform us, our community, our world, restoration of all things. That is, the problem is moral, not biological, though the biology has been affected as a result of the fall. And salvation then is forgiveness and reconciliation and reformation of God's image in us. That was the Jewish Christian worldview. Some facets of it would be accepted by the Islamic worldview. But the Hindu worldview doesn't see human problem essentially as a moral problem or biological problem, but it sees human problem as a metaphysical problem. That you are God, but you have forgotten that you are God. You are preoccupied with your finite self. Ignorance is your problem. Enlightenment is salvation. Self-realization is salvation. So, if you understand that according to Hinduism, the essence of human problem is metaphysical, that you don't know who you are. You've forgotten who you are, what you are. And realizing who you are, self-realization, is salvation. Yoga then is path to salvation. Why? And there are many paths to salvation, many forms of yoga. There can be many paths of salvation because salvation is a matter of perception, seeing, realizing, experiencing. Realization or seeing or experiencing is dependent upon our nervous system. And there are many ways of altering our nervous system. So salvation is a matter of consciousness, alteration, expansion of consciousness. Consciousness is dependent upon our nervous system, and there are many ways of influencing our nervous system. Therefore, there are many paths of salvation. Chemistry can affect your brain, your nervous system. Intake of oxygen, if you can reduce oxygen intake, if you stand upside down on your head, allow sufficient blood to flow into your head, it'll affect your nervous system, and you will have experience of altered states of consciousness. So there are many ways of affecting nervous system and consciousness, including sexual intercourse, and that's why Tantra and the sexual mysticism comes into this. There are many ways of altering one's consciousness, and therefore there are many paths of salvation. But if the human problem is a moral problem, that I have rebelled against God, then there is only one way of salvation, that He would offer forgiveness to me, that He would forgive me and He would welcome me into His arms once again. And then salvation is not something that I can earn. Salvation is something, forgiveness is something that He has to offer. And that becomes a very big difference between yoga, which is a matter of self-effort, and grace, which is a matter of something that God offers to you as salvation. So in this particular lecture, I want to just very briefly give you a bird's eye view of 7 different forms of yoga which are currently popular in the West. There are many more. We will spend the bulk of our time on Hatha Yoga, on physical yoga, because that is the most popular form of yoga. But within India itself, that is not by any means the most important form of yoga. Now, highest yoga in India is Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga, Jnana means knowledge. Now, knowledge not as in rational knowledge that you study in a book or in a university, but knowledge as in Gnostic knowledge, secret knowledge, which is non-rational. And so this Jnana Yoga is really what is known as Gnosticism, a secret knowledge which is experienced when you go within and you transcend thoughts, transcend reasoning, and experience alteration of your consciousness through meditation. That's Jnana Yoga, and it comes through many different forms. Raja Yoga is one popular form of it. Some of you may have heard of Brahma Kumari's Ishwari Vishwavidyalaya. They were very popular here in the West a while ago. They're still around, and that's the group with which I learned Raj Yoga, their version of Raj Yoga, and meditated in their system, in their tradition. Now, Bhakti Yoga is a second popular version of yoga. Bhakti Yoga Bhakti means devotion, worship. So Hare Krishna movement is one movement which most of you would be vaguely familiar with, since they are often here still in Hollywood chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. There are 3 words, Hare, Rama, and Krishna, which they chant forever in different combinations. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, etc. And you are supposed to, in later stages, you are supposed to chant it for days on end. Now, the different schools of Bhakti Yoga would define bhakti or devotion in different ways. The other very popular version of Bhakti Yoga was Transcendental Meditation, TM, which continues to be a very powerful and growing movement, though a lot of people also fall out of it. I took initiation into Transcendental Meditation in Mahesh Yogi's living room in Rishikesh. He became very popular after the Beatles visited him in India, and it was Beatles really who financed this ashram, which is a beautiful ashram in Haridwar, in Rishikesh, where I had the privilege of spending a few days learning firsthand and being initiated into TM. What happens in TM is that you begin with worship. They call it puja. You have the image of his guru, Mahesh Yogi's guru. You garland it, put flowers, sweet, incense, etc., pay a little fee, and then the initiator recites some shloka, etc., some verses, and he gives you your mantra. You are supposed to keep your mantra secret. It's a sound like Om or Hring or Shring or some word. The words is not supposed to have any meaning. Even if it has a meaning, you're not supposed to know what it means. You're supposed to recite it at least 20 minutes a day in the morning, 20 minutes a day at evening, so 40 minutes a day as the beginner. You're reciting a sound. And Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, although they could evoke, and they do evoke, images of specific people. Ram and Krishna are two mythological gods in India. But the point of repeating endlessly the same words is not to think about these individuals or to talk to them or communicate with them, but to develop what they call Krishna consciousness. So their thesis would be that the Krishna consciousness is the original state of the soul. But we've lost it. You're not conscious of Krishna, you're conscious of yourself or your boss or your friend or whoever or some stars. And that's your problem. You need to recover Krishna consciousness, because that's bliss, that's heaven, altering your consciousness that it's just filled with Krishna, so you chant Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. Now, the point of Bhakti Yoga is to get lost in the consciousness of this particular deity. Now, very often the names, the mantras that TM will give you, Transcendental Meditation, is the name of a demigod. A demigod in Greek mythology is half man and half god. When a divine being has intercourse with a human being, the offspring is a demigod. But in India, a demigod is an asura or a demon, the rival of gods. But they are rivals to God, they are demons, but you recite them because they are in the spiritual realm, and through calling upon them, you begin to embrace everything and become part of everything. We talked about it last time, and if you weren't here last time, and if it doesn't make sense to you, please do ask again. So, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Mahesh Yogi also calls it the mechanical path of salvation. By that he means that if you want to see the world, you don't have to do anything. You open your eyes and automatically the sensation comes to you and you begin to see the world. So seeing is mechanical. You don't really have to do anything. Likewise, seeing yourself, that your true self, the divine self within you, you just have to turn your gaze inward and it automatically gets there. You don't have to do anything. So he calls this Japa Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, a mechanical path of salvation, because it's just chanting one particular mantra. The third yoga, which is talked about in India extensively, is Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga essentially means doing the duties of your caste. Now, this, of course, is today it would be presented in very sophisticated, cultured ways, like Mahatma Gandhi would be described as karma yogi, a man of action. But essentially, through the millions of, thousands of years, karma yoga was a means of enabling different castes to perform the duties of their caste without murmuring. So it was a powerful manipulative technique, I'm ashamed to admit. So if you're born a sweeper, your duty is to clean my toilet every morning. You hate doing it, but I teach you that this is your karma. If you do your karma without desire for rewards, you don't try and make a lot of money to have a good house and a good name and a good position. Just keep doing your duty, serve me well, and you'll find enlightenment. It becomes a manipulative technique. This is how it has been used in India most of the time, because it's very hard to actually understand how somebody doing his own duty, let's say if you're a water carrier, your job is to go to the well, draw water for your boss, your master every day. How does that actually help you realize yourself? Nobody ever really explains that to you. But it was a clever doctrine, and most religions have had doctrines which are meant to really, as Karl Marx would put it, as opium of the people. And as far as I'm concerned, this was one opium popularly used in India. Now, fourth yoga that I'm talking about is called Surat Shabda Yoga. Surat is sound, Surat is soul, Shabda is sound. Surat Shabda Yoga, it means union of sound, union of word. They would use the term word in English these days, but sound is more appropriate translation, and I'll explain the difference. Union of sound and soul. Now, the idea is that we discussed yesterday that all matter, everything in this universe is energy. Energy is frequencies, and frequency is sound. When something vibrates, it makes sound. So there is the primordial sound, which a physicist would say comes with Big Bang, and you can still hear it. So everything is really a energy frequency, a sound. It's that sound you have to get tuned to in order to rise up to the Creator, the soul. So you use the sound, and the sound is within you because you are part of that cosmos. Now, this version was really popularized in the West by Divine Light Mission. There was, those of you who are old enough to have been conscious in 1960s, 70s, 80s, there was this 14-year-old young man who, when he was 16, I think he married his American secretary who was 24, and his mother, he was God, his father was God, he was God, he headed up Divine Light Mission, and this was one form of yoga, path of sound and light, that he really popularized here. It was a secret knowledge that he imparted, Gnostic knowledge that he imparted to his followers. But then when he married this American secretary and he ate a lot of ice cream, became very fat, his mother expelled him from the mission for his unspiritual ways of life. And his older brother was appointed the god of the movement. And his older brother has had number of criminal cases against him of kidnapping, rape, murder, etc., etc. But he is still heads up this movement out of India, not too far from where my office and home base is in India now. The other powerful movement that has spread the Surat Shabda Yoga is the Radha Swami movement, which began near Agra, where the Taj Mahal is, but a more breakaway group, Radha Swami Satsang Bias, is the group that has really popularized this, and I spent considerable time stayed in that ashram for a few days I guess in 1974 or something. The details of some of this are in my book, The World of Gurus. So if you want details of any of these, you can buy that book or borrow that book. And the theory, there are many different techniques as part of this Surat Shabda Yoga. How does the soul get out? If you put your fingers on your eyebrows and sort of force your eyeballs towards the center, you will see a third eye, a light, in the center of your forehead. That's your third eye. So if you try it out, you will see a little light. So now that's supposed to be your third eye. You press your eyeballs gently inside. So you'll see your third eye. That's your third eye. And in this meditation, your soul is supposed to get out of your body through that eye. Now, as you're sitting and meditating, you're practicing many different versions. You are tasting divine nectar. That's a difficult yogic exercise where you swallow your tongue and then curl it backwards. So instead of tongue going forward, it's going backward. And it's supposed to touch a particular point where it tastes the divine nectar, which they say is the living water that Jesus talked about. Now, when the basic exercise actually is meditating on the sound which is within you, breathing, through focusing on your breathing and then letting your soul get out of your body and travel in astral worlds and then finally merge into God. And the reason they use sound is sound and words are similar yet opposite. Word is sound with sense, right? So I say chair, and the sound chair you associate with that object there on which you sit. A sound with sense, with meaning, is word. The Greeks use the term logos, word, for the spoken word as well as the word in the mind. The unspoken word, which means sense. So, logos could be translated, or word could be translated as in the beginning was sense, rationality, logic. Sense was with God, reason was God. It created everything. So God created everything with His wisdom. His wisdom is logos, His reason, His word existed with Him for all eternity. Now, so that ultimate reality is word or rationality or sense or logic was part of the Judeo-Christian worldview. It had its Greek dimension as well, which is a discussion that I won't go into it. But the Greeks soon turned against it. So by the time of the New Testament, Greeks had given up their own notion of logos. It was saved by a Jew in Alexandria, Philo, who essentially said to the Greeks that, look, you had a brilliant insight. This really is true, that in the beginning is the Word. But then it became part of the Western worldview through the New Testament. John, taking this Greek concept of logos and the Jewish concept of wisdom of God and beginning his gospel by saying that in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was logos, logos was with God, logos was God. Now the Surat Shabda Yoga uses John 1:1 extensively to try and justify their yoga from the Bible. But in fact what they teach is the opposite of the biblical idea, because sound is sound without sense. All of the yogas, so when you repeat Krishna, 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 or anything, if you say Jesus, 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 what you're doing is you are destroying sense. A word endlessly repeated loses its sense, loses its meaning. So I say Mike, and Mike says yes. I say Mike, so he says what? I say, Mike. He says, yeah, I'm listening. And I say, Mike. So he says, well, say something. I say, Mike. The Mike. The word ceases to have any meaning. He thinks I'm crazy and he stops listening. And the point is to stop all ideas. So what yoga is doing is confusing logos, a word, with sound. Logos actually is sound with sense, with emphasis being on sense. And that meaning in sense, what does this mean in practice? It means, let me just describe one actual conversation I went into. In Missouri one day, I went to the meditation room of the Radhaswami Satsang group, and they were talking about this Surat Shabda Yoga. And one of the meditators started bragging about how his soul gets out and how he travels all over the astral world. And he went on to say that, these Americans, they've gone to the moon just now. We've been going to other galaxies for centuries, for ages. I said, well, that's wonderful. The difference is that these Americans went there and brought some rocks back. You don't bring anything back, so we don't really know where exactly have you gone, whether you actually ever got out of your head. We don't know. But anyway, you see the difference between the point that I'm making. But let's move rather quickly because I want to focus on Hatha Yoga. Kundalini Yoga is another form of yoga which is very popular in America, in the West. And in fact, Shirley Maclaine really popularized Kundalini Yoga, the whole system, the Indian anatomy, psychic anatomy, that you have 7 psychic points in your body, 7 chakras they call it. The bottom chakra just above your rectum, 3 centimeters above your rectum, that's where the serpent power lies dormant, coiled up. So you have serpent power in you. And the purpose of the Kundalini Yoga is to awaken this power. So the serpent in you is sleeping, asleep. You want to awaken that serpent power. And then as it rises up, it goes through 5 other chakras and finally gets to the 7th chakra, which is at the crown of your head. So this serpent power is feminine, female. The crown chakra is male, Shiva and Shakti. When the two finally merge, that's when an individual experiences his divinity, his completeness. Male and female is within you. Now this has become a very important intellectual rationale behind the gay movement, the philosophical, the metaphysics of the gay movement has really latched onto Kundalini Yoga, and that's why you keep hearing about these chakras, because it is an interesting metaphysics which is saying that each one of us is complete. Male is within you. If you're a woman, you're both male and female. If you're a male, you have female within you. And you need to awaken the feminine within you or the masculine within you. Now, quite honestly, obviously, the presupposition of marriage is that I'm finite, I'm incomplete. I'm male, I'm not female, and I need a woman to become whole. So marriage is acknowledging my finiteness, that without a female, I'm incomplete. But if I believe that feminine is within me, then I need to awaken my own feminine, not be dependent on another woman. So celibacy, sannyas, renunciation of marriage, becomes an important part of yoga, because yoga is trying to realize my own completeness, male and femaleness. And therefore, while I might use a sexual partner, as most yogis would do, use a sexual partner to awaken my own feminine or my own masculine, I should not be married to a woman, or if you're a woman, you shouldn't be married to a male, because then you will never realize your completeness within yourself. And so most of these yogis are unmarried, those who preach some of these versions of yoga, if they are doing more than physical exercises. Let's move beyond Kundalini Yoga now. I talked about, just returning to it for one more minute, last time I talked about Swami Muktananda of Ganeshpuri, and I spent some time in his ashram. He was the one who really brought Kundalini Yoga to the West. I told you his story of how he'd gone to all the holy places in India, met all the holy men, and had been completely disillusioned that he hadn't seen any enlightened person. And as he was passing through this small town and saw this naked ascetic sitting on a pile of human excreta in a bliss of inner ecstasy, he realized that here was a man who had become one with everything. And he asked if this guru would enlighten him, and this naked ascetic invited him to come and sit in his lap, and then manipulated his genitals, stimulated, awakened his kundalini, and he began to have experiences eventually of his divinity. Now when he goes back into his hut, closes his hut, bolts his door, and sits in meditation and begins to awaken his kundalini, he has tremendous graphic descriptions, which I've quoted from his official biographies in my book, The World of Gurus, and also some of it is in this book. I have a chapter on yoga in this book, New Religious Movements, where he describes that when the Kundalini began to awaken in his body, he had these tremendously painful experiences, delusional experiences. He thought that he was going insane, getting mad, and he's seeing these dreadful demons come through the closed doors of his hut and enter into his body. And he saying that this was being possessed by demons and experiencing my own divinity. So, because good and evil, God and Satan are one, everything is one, you have to transcend the notion of good and evil. So his movement began to practice that, and it split into dozens of factions already because of a lot of legal complaints about rape and murder and financial swindling, etc. Nevertheless, the movement, even these breakaway groups, and they're very powerful around Philadelphia, etc., these movements continue to attract tremendous following because there is power there. I've met Americans and Westerners, people from New Zealand in their ashram, testifying that how their Kundalini was awakened. So Muktananda called it Siddha Yoga, or perfect yoga, or Maha Yoga, great yoga, because he said that in all other forms of yoga, you have to have the discipline, you have to do something. This is one form of yoga where you don't do anything. Guru awakens your Kundalini. Now you might have a female guru, and sex begins to come into this, that your partner awakens your Kundalini, and then you have these experiences that William James, the American philosopher who wrote the classic book on mysticism called Varieties of Religious Experience, he described this mysticism as diabolical mysticism. And this is one version which is really flourishing in the West. Well, let's move on to Tantra Yoga, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because a few months ago when the Da Vinci Code film came here, I did give a whole lecture on sexual mysticism, and I think we have copies of that. Then I gave the same lecture in 5 hours, five lectures in Tucson, Arizona, which are on the internet. I don't know if we have copies of those lectures, but because of the Da Vinci Code impact, the heart of Da Vinci Code is sexual mysticism, which is coming from Christian mysticism of the 1st, 2nd century, particularly 2nd century, but drawing the justification from Tantra. There's a lot of Tantra on the internet. You just need to Google to see that Tantra Yoga is perhaps more popular than even Hatha Yoga because of the sexual nature of it. The secular sex becomes boring after a while, and this mystifies. This Tantra Yoga was heart also of the Church of Satan, that ultimately there are two energies, male and female, yin-yang, and you have to bring a union of that, as they would say. Rajneesh was a guru who used to be a professor of philosophy in India, became a guru, came to America, had a huge ranch in Oregon, was famous for his Rolls Royces, and he wrote a book, a very influential book called From Sex to Superconsciousness. And one of the recurring theme in his books was that all reality is one. As we discussed last Wednesday, all reality is one. It appears to us as many because of our mind. Mind acts like a prism. When one ray passes through a prism, that prism divides it into 7 rays that we can see, many more rays that we can't see. So mind acts like a prism. It divides one reality into many. Salvation is killing the mind. Mind or intellect is the chief villain. You have to kill the mind. So in his ashrams, in his temple, used to be a sign that please leave your shoes and your questions outside the temple of God. The whole point of religious techniques and exercises is to kill your mind, to stop thinking, to be freed from your mind. And that is, as we will see in a minute, also what Hatha Yoga does. So one thing Rajneesh kept saying is that the mind divides one reality into many. The ultimate plurality, duality is male and female. And that duality, when you transcend that duality, and you do that in sexual intercourse, so he described male and female becoming one flesh as the moment when you are born again, the two become one. That, he said, is the enlightenment, is salvation. How to prolong that orgasm and how to turn it into a perpetual state of experience of oneness and ecstasy. And once again, this has to necessarily denounce marriage. So if you really joined Rajneesh's ashram, you had to adopt what he called neo-sannyas. Neo-sannyas is not renouncing sex, but renouncing marriage. You still use sex, but you use sex to awaken the feminine within you, or to male within you, and to become one, initially with the help of your partner, but you learn to become one and learn to have a perpetual orgasm, and you use the other person as a ladder to climb up to God, or experience of God, and then you discard the ladder when you have become complete in yourself. So you don't have a commitment to the other person. Sex is not a means of binding two people into a permanent union, but binding you with the ultimate reality into a permanent union of oneness. And therefore you have neo-sannyas. You renounce marriage, but you use sex to find the enlightenment. But let's move on to the 7th yoga, which is Hatha Yoga, which obviously is very important to many of you here. Now, Hatha Yoga was first systematized, or yoga itself was first systematized by Patanjali, written down around 200 years after Christ. But some of the ideas go back 300 years before Christ. Now, it is at the core of it, Patanjali's Hatha Yoga is an 8-limbed path to enlightenment. They call it 8-limbed to emphasize that like a body has many organs, and without a particular organ, the body is incomplete. You have to have all the 8 limbs if you want to find enlightenment. And no one limb is more important than the other. It's an organic whole. So the first one is yama, ethical behavior, which is 5 points are most important. In your notes, ahimsa, non-violence, which involves vegetarianism, that we will discuss in another lecture. Satya is commitment to truthfulness, non-stealing. Brahmacharya is celibacy. Now, brahmacharya doesn't necessarily mean renouncing sex. Celibacy in India means renouncing marriage, not sex. And this is very important. So, while a Catholic priest is celibate, has taken vow of celibacy, if he has sexual relationship, you will jump upon him as breaking his vow of celibacy. But a Hindu monk who has taken a vow of brahmacharya or celibacy, if he has sex with his female devotees, you wouldn't condemn him because what he has renounced is marriage, not sex. It's a very important difference in the use of the word celibacy in the Catholic tradition and Hindu tradition. And then there is a relinquishing of wealth, which is part of normal behavior. So the phenomenon that you have here in the West of a yoga teacher becoming very wealthy because people would pay to study yoga, that phenomenon is only a 40-year-old Western phenomenon, part of postmodern yoga. We never had that in India. Gurus never taught yoga for money because you renounce wealth. A disciple surrendered himself to a guru to serve guru, so he gave his time, he gave his attention, his service, but he didn't have any money to give, and he didn't give any money. He might be milking your cows and cleaning your hut, but that's about it. A teacher renounced, a real yogi is renouncing the world, which is part of your ethical behavior. So it was part of asceticism. Then there are personal rules called niyama, which is purity, that is very often a ritual purity, very much like the Jewish legalism. There is contentment, that whatever I have, whatever I get, dry bread, that's enough. There is tapas, austerities, fasting, silence, vows of silence, or just sitting in one position for 144 years, etc. The great austerities that you have to practice. Self-study, swadhyaya, going within oneself, examining oneself, knowing oneself, how your breathing comes in and how your breath goes out, and how your body organ functions, the autonomic nervous system that you're not normally conscious of, becoming conscious of the involuntary actions that keep happening in your body, such as breathing. Becoming conscious of that. And then self-surrender, surrendering yourself to your guru, surrendering yourself to God's particular God that you might have chosen. So you are no longer your own, and you have totally surrendered. Those are personal rules. And then third is asanas, which is the most popular part of yoga in the West. These are bodily postures. Now, the focus is on the body, not praying to a God, because there is no God out there to pray. The God is within the body, so the focus is on the body. And that's what B.K.S. Iyengar, who has been very popular yoga teacher in the West, makes an important point there. Then the fourth is pranayama, or controlling your breathing, because oxygen intake is so important to the normal functioning of your brain. If you reduce the intake of oxygen and regulate it and minimize it, then you can begin to have the experiences of altered states of consciousness. Pratyahara is the withdrawal of the senses from external world. You're no longer seeing the world, you're no longer listening, you're not tasting, you're not touching, you're withdrawing your senses, because this material world, the plurality that you experience around yourself, is Maya, is unreal. So you are going within yourself where reality is, getting away from unreality. And then there is concentration, dharana, and meditation, dhyana. Now meditation again is not meditation on word, it could be meditation on sound. So you're not thinking of anything. You're not thinking noble thoughts. You're trying to get rid of all thoughts. How it functions is that at any given moment, you have hundreds of thousands of stimuli coming to you. You choose to focus on one stimulus, one candle flickering or one sound, let's say Om, which you keep repeating. So psychologically what happens is that when you focus your attention on a single stimulus, it helps you to shut off all the other stimuli, and then it becomes a non-stimulus, so your mind goes blank. You're conscious, but you're not conscious of anything or any thought. You're just conscious of consciousness, which is supposed to be self or God. And then there is samadhi, which is absorption of your consciousness into itself. You've become totally oblivious of the Maya, of material world, of everything else, and you are just lost in yourself. That's your joy, that's your completeness. Food and smells and arts and movies and Hollywood, everything is irrelevant. Now, let's come to the two important questions which I'm sure so many of you have, and that is it possible to separate yogic exercises, Hatha Yoga exercises, from all these metaphysical assumptions that I've talked about? Yoga as a path of salvation. What if I just want to exercise? And my answer to that is that it is actually possible to have telephones for toddlers. We have two daughters. Our older daughter lives in India, and my wife calls both our daughters every day. She has other daughters who have adopted my wife as their mother, and many of them also call her every day. But the two daughters, she's got to talk to every day. Now, she has 4 kids. Our older daughter has 4 kids, including twin boys. Supposing when she calls them, they are always fighting that I also want to talk to Nani and I also want to talk to Nani. The telephone has to be passed around to all 4 of them. You have pretty long calls every day. So imagine that I decide to buy their own telephones for them. So I go to Toys R Us, and I buy 4 telephones and give it to them with their pictures in them, and a gadget for my daughter, that when one of them starts saying, I want the telephone to talk to my grandmother, you press one button and his phone starts ringing. So he gets his phone and he says hello, and he hears his favorite Chintu monkey coming online and saying, hi Samarth, how are you doing? I'm Chintu monkey, I went to school. Did you go to school? Etc., etc. So he has this conversation. Now, these are phones that ring, that talk, and he can talk back into them. These are telephones for toddlers. Any problem with having telephones for toddlers? It's good for them. They have their own telephones. It's good for my daughter. It's good for the communication, phone costs, etc. that we have. So it's possible to have yoga for beginners. If you want to see yourself as a toddler who is content with the toys, nobody could really argue. We talked about Rolex. If you're getting a Rolex for $50, which actually costs $5,000, is there a problem? Well, you might have a problem with the stories this gentleman was telling you about why he needs to sell this Rolex. But you can go around that. Now, the real question is that you have a number of anecdotes from your friends, acquaintances, people you know, who have found yoga to be therapeutic for their health. That we do yoga because it's good for my health. Now, obviously, stretching exercises are good for your health. A flexible body is good for you. So, is there any problem? No, I wouldn't see any problem with somebody finding yogic exercises and finding it as an alternative medicine for one's healing. My problem is that a lot of the stress-related sicknesses that are supposed to be cured by yoga, those sicknesses should not be there in the first place. That stress shouldn't be there in the first place. If instead of flexible body, or before pursuing flexible body, or as seriously as you pursue a flexible body, you begin to pursue a flexible soul. The problem with the West, the postmodern West, why there is so much stress and stress-related sicknesses, is that you have flexible bodies, inflexible minds and souls. Now let me illustrate. A few years ago, I had a heart attack. I was visiting here, picked up my wife and I, we picked our daughter and drove to Portland, Oregon, drove back. On my way back, I had a heart attack. For 4 or 5 days it was going on, and I was treating it as a case of acidity, taking antacids until it just became unbearable. Pain became, and the burps became unbearable, and had to go into Loma Linda Hospital, where our daughter was working at that point and was admitted with heart attack. Now, a physician friend of mine, after I came out of the hospital, he looked at all the facts that yes, the blood pressure was high, cholesterol was high, blood sugar was high, but he said that, look, these numbers don't really explain your heart attack. These should have been low, but there was something else. Well, there indeed was. The heart attack was there because I was mad at my wife. I wasn't willing to bend my heart, my mind. A lot of those stress-related diseases, including heart attack, wouldn't be there if there was repentance for evil that I have done. If there was forgiveness for wrongs that others have done against me, if I was pursuing meekness and gentleness and humility, I wouldn't have a happy marriage. A wife is so much better for my health than physical exercises. Now, I obviously need physical exercises, but a happy marriage is more important for my health than physical exercises. When the focus for your health becomes on taking care of your body, not relationships, and those relationships break down because the flexibility of your soul isn't important, flexibility of your mind isn't important. It's amazing to see the whole feminist movement in America, for example, fighting against submission as an evil, that I don't want to submit. Submission is violation of my dignity. And then they would pay hefty fee to an arrogant, crude yoga teacher from India who would in fact be insulting them every day in his class. So you pay to get insulted, but you wouldn't accept, you wouldn't forgive a husband who may be rude, who may be crude, who may be insensitive. Because submission is no longer a virtue, but then you will surrender to a guru. So, is there a problem with doing yoga for health? No, there isn't a problem doing yoga for health. But I think it is time to reevaluate priorities. What really is human problem? Sin, if sin really is the human problem, then confessing our sins, repenting for our sin, finding forgiveness, forgiving those who have wronged us, rebuilding relationships, those are the spiritual disciplines that we need to seek. But if we reject that worldview, reject those needs, and then we have all kinds of stresses and stress-related diseases, then obviously we have to deal with those symptoms. So stress is really a symptom. And my submission to you is that a happy marriage may well be what you need to work for. The amount of time and money and effort that you spend taking care of your body, if you spend that in taking care of your soul and your relationships, you will probably not need much of that therapy because you would be dealing with root issues. Thank you very much.